Okay, so this is Answers News Live. Okay, Dr. Purdham's not here today. Let me introduce her the way she normally does. Hi, this is Answers News Live. But she's away today, so I'm going to introduce it. Hey, g'day. You're on Answers News Live. We're going to have a great time together here as we discuss some articles and things. Hey, what do you reckon, Bodie?
That's right, eh?
Yeah. Okay, and we have Brian Osborne with us today.
Hey guys. Yep.
Filling in for Georgia, who's away on vacation. I don't know how she got away with having vacation, but apparently she is.
I don't think you allowed that.
And what's that?
I don't think you allowed that.
No, we normally don't. But anyway, so we're going to follow along here. I thought just as notifications go out and we get people online, just to mention to you that this past Saturday, 7th of July, was the 2-year anniversary of the Ark being opened to the public. And
Right.
Yeah.
there's welcome to our studio audience. I forgot to welcome you. Hi.
Welcome.
Are you here? Okay. So I can see that you are here. If you're a millennial, you might not be here. You might want to ask yourself. So
let me get this straight. The Ark's been open for 2 years.
for 2 years.
Now, the Ark only, the real Ark, Noah's Ark, only had to float for about a year.
Right.
And then they left the Ark.
Right.
So ours has
and it was
lasted
abandoned.
longer.
Ours is 2 years old and it's not abandoned.
All right.
That's true.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, atheists are real upset about that.
Oh.
People are still coming all over the world, thousands every day. And actually, you can see the Ark here, and this is Amzara's restaurant, the zoo back here. If you're wondering what the construction project is behind the Ark, we're expanding the zoo and going to put a big stage in there so we can have some wonderful creationist programs with the animals. Over here is Village Market, over here is the Monument Walk, and this is a 2,500-seat auditorium, multi-purpose centre that'll be open in November. And then this whole area back here, we're putting in a big children's playground that is educational and has facility for children with disabilities as well. And that'll be next year. Okay, so these are some of the things you'll see at the Ark when you go now. So it's wonderful to see the way in which it has expanded and really come on since opening the Ark. And then the Creation Museum. We're here in the Creation Museum today. We're in Legacy Hall, which means we're in this bit right here. This over here is the brand new parking lot we had to build because so many people are coming to the museum since the Ark opened. The numbers have doubled, and then we have all these buses that come as well. And so it's an incredible place.
Yeah, it's been
hey,
fascinating.
do you know where I was yesterday? In fact, you know, I was speaking.
I do, actually.
In the Promised Land?
So, no, I was in Cary, North Carolina.
Promised Land.
I wanted to show you a special guy that I met. So I met this guy, Sammy. There's Sammy. He's 12 years old. And Sammy, it was his birthday, actually.
Was it really?
Yes, and he has spina bifida. And his parents brought him to a special meeting that I was speaking at. He didn't know he was coming. And apparently he's devoured Ken Ham books. And he says he wants to be the next Ken Ham. And so I knew it was his birthday because the parents told me ahead of time. So I presented Sammy with this special little bag here of all sorts of goodies, and I signed some books to him and so on. And his mother sent us an email and said before he went to bed, he looked at his mother and said, "This was my best day ever."
Wow.
Isn't that special?
It is.
So I hope Sammy is able to get to watch this. And by the way, happy birthday.
Yeah, happy
birthday. For your birthday here. Well, hey, seeing as Georgia's not here, we always like to represent Georgia, and she'll be watching this program later on to see how we did. There's a bear because she can tend to be a bear, as you know, because she's a scientist. And there's a porcupine because she can be prickly. And then this one's a snapping turtle. Okay, so we thought that should represent Georgia.
She's probably going to be shell-shocked over that one.
Yeah, and Bodie.
I had no part in this, Georgia. All right.
Okay, so.
Hey, by the way, we got a vote of conference from William Connie over in Michigan. He said, "I hope you guys can get something done without Georgia."
Oh yes, without what are we going to do without Georgia?
There's somebody from Denmark that said they're missing.
Okay,
the
we've got a lot of people on. I've got a lot of people on here. You're following on YouTube, are you?
Answers in Genesis.
Answers in Genesis. Bodie's going to follow on YouTube here, and somebody says their family's at the Creation Museum today. and there's a number of other people who are putting comments in here. So let's start with the first one. Normally, George introduces these. I'll introduce them today, and then we'll discuss them. This was an article in which we read the headline, "Churchgoers Stick Around for Theology, Not Music or Preachers." And so Lifeway, which is associated with Lifeway Research, the Southern Baptist Convention. Well, Lifeway did this research. They often do research on matters pertaining to the church.
Correct.
And this particular research, they were asking the question why you would consider changing churches. And the intriguing thing that they particularly brought up was this, that the main reason people would consider changing churches because of the beliefs, the doctrine. Look, church changed its doctrine, 54%. But notice something, music, only 5%. Now, the reason that interested me is because my own observations as I've traveled around across America and other parts of the world in this day and age, particularly in our Western world, we know that it's become much more secularized, and a lot of churches are recognizing there's an exodus from the church. We know 2/3 of young people are leaving the church by the time they reach college age, very few returning. In fact, only 18% of millennials attend church, whereas of the older generations, going back to what's called the greatest generation, those born before 1928, it was 56% in America.
Wow.
So there is an exodus from the church. And a lot of churches, I've noticed, have been watering down the teaching of the Word and making music the dominant feature because they think that will attract people.
Yeah, they think, oh yeah, that'll bring people back in. Let's change the music. But you know that usually doesn't reach a lot of people.
What they want are answers, and they want to know the Bible's real. And that's what I found even in our own teaching. Now, don't get me wrong, we don't want people to think that we don't like music. We love music, and I love music, and I love to sing praises to the Lord. But you know, I go to churches where they'll have a long time of singing, you know, 3 songs, 30 times each, standing up, which makes my back really sore. But then you're only allowed 15 minutes or 20 minutes to speak or something like that. I don't care if you have an hour music, but I want an hour equal time for teaching. Sure. But what I have noticed is music has become, in many churches, the dominant feature because I think that's what's going to change the culture and get the people in. But have a look, we're losing the culture, and we're still losing people from the church, and this research here indicates, hey, they want teaching. People want teaching.
Well, if you look at the mainline Protestant denominations that have gone liberal in their theology, they go missing. They
do.
They go extinct. People start walking away because if you're just like the world, why even go to it? You know?
Yeah, and that's not necessarily people just walking away. What they're looking at specifically here is people leaving their church, going to a different church. And what they found was Lutherans, Methodists, and Baptists were the highest percentage to retain so that people wouldn't go off to a different church. But we also found that the people over 65 years old, they tended to stay in their same church.
Sure.
They didn't want to move around. What we're seeing is, in many cases, people who are younger. It says here, one of the things, most church members have been at their church longer than their pastor. That's interesting too, because you know a lot of pastors tend to move around too.
They do.
But yeah, I mean, I found that interesting that the main reason was actually because of the teaching, even though there's all these other excuses a lot of times are given.
Well, you know, it's interesting because I do school programs, and you probably do them too when we're out speaking. And I do these programs where they bus these teenagers in. I do K to 6, and we do 7 to 12. And I've had thousands of these young people in auditorium at one time, and I speak to them for an hour and a half. Now, I use lots of illustrations and so on, but I can keep them for an hour and a half, no music, just teaching. And they come afterwards, many of them, and they say, we've never had those answers before. This helps make the Bible real. And it really does. It shows that the biology, geology, astronomy, anthropology, and the Bible is true. And then we explain the gospel based in that history and so on. And what I found is when I go to churches to speak, sometimes I'm told, oh, if you're going to speak to the young people, you know, 5 or 10 minutes and then they lose attention. But you get up and talk about these topics of origins and Genesis and science and where they're at and the things that they've heard that contradict the Bible, and you give answers, they'll sit there for ages.
Well, and that's really where a lot of their questions are at, is on those issues. And then when you do that, you connect the Bible to the real world. It makes it tangible, makes their faith tangible, and it makes it applicable to other areas in their life.
Hey, one set of research that was in here said that 27% wanted their church to help them understand more about God and the Bible, while at the same time 19% wanted their church to provide more Bible study groups so they could dive into the Bible more. Another one was 14% said that they wanted someone to be able to answer their spiritual questions. Another 8% wanted to be provided with a mentor to help them understand these types of questions. When you tally all that up, that's about between 60 and 68% of people wanted more learning.
Well, it's interesting. By the way, there's somebody here I'm really worried about. Says watching from the car. I hope they're not watching at the same time as driving.
You should pray for traveling mercies.
Yeah,
Somebody was watching from Kentucky.
But you know, we have an Answers Bible curriculum, which is a Sunday school curriculum, Bible curriculum, that thousands of homeschoolers are using now. 10,000 churches are using. And it's apologetics, biblical authority, chronological, goes right through the Old and New Testament, connects them together, teaches real meaty stuff, but teaches them how to defend the faith. Apologetics, that's missing from a lot of churches. And those churches that are using it, we have had overwhelming response that it's revolutionizing their church. And the older people love it, and the young people say, we've never learned so much. And you know what they found? Little children love to learn. And they said a lot of the Sunday school material that they've used in the past is very shallow, fluff and stuff. And when they get onto this, it's so meaty. And people have the idea that, oh, kids can't cope with that meaty stuff. They want it.
Oh, they love it.
It seems to show if you want your people to stay in your church, preach the Word of God, stand on the Bible, and people will stay for that teaching. Yeah. And it's interesting, you guys may have saw Dr. Albert Mohler mentioned about a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, in a speech where when he took over as the president of Southern Seminary, people told him, if you stand on the Bible, you'll fall away. People won't come to that. If you stand on the Bible, people won't come to your seminary or Bible college. And it's thrived since he took over.
Well, you know, it's the same with
on the Word of God.
It's the same with the Ark and the Creation Museum. People said if you build an attraction and you want to build it the quality of Disney and you're overtly Christian and present the gospel, people aren't going to come. Guess what? People flock in from all over the world. 30% of those who come are non-Christians. So people really want answers. They really want to know. So, hey, somebody here got on there and said her husband was driving the car. She said, my hubby is driving. So that makes me feel a lot better. I was really getting stressed there before.
Is he watching too?
I hope he's not. I hope he's not. Maybe he's listening as he's driving. Okay, let's get on to this next article. Freak accident created a massive army of super fertile clones.
Don't you just love the way they come up with titles?
Yeah.
This was your favorite article, right?
Oh yeah. This is. It's all about. What do you call crayfish, Bodie?
Crawdads.
Crawdads.
Where do you get that from? Crawdads?
My ancestors.
I don't know. Yeah. My dad.
Passed down the line.
Don't they eat them in Louisiana?
Yeah, they're like freshwater shrimp. They eat them all
catch them
over
in
the
my
place.
creek all the time.
Really? And you eat them?
Good. I didn't then.
Okay, all right. So Bodie, what's this article all about?
Okay, so apparently what happened is one of these ones that came from Florida ended up over in Europe.
It's a Florida crayfish.
Ended up getting loose, and it was kind of a unique one. Just so you know, a lot of these can reproduce sexually, you know, having a male and a female, but in some cases they do reproduce asexually. So it's almost like a clone, which is why they use the word clone.
So in other words,
from the mother.
This female could produce more females.
That's right. So this one ended up over in Europe, and basically there was a gene pool so that all the descendants essentially looked like her. And so now they're starting to spread in various parts of Europe as far as Sweden, and they were kind of surprised that its range really took off. So it's a fascinating piece of how these things can be so diverse and move around so quickly. You know, it makes me think of times after the flood, you know, when things were populating various parts of the world, even sea creatures had to start moving around because a lot of sea creatures died in the flood as well. So, you know, I was kind of fascinated by
Here's the amazing thing. Whether they produce sexually or asexually, crawfish, wait till you hear this, remain crayfish.
Yeah.
Well,
crayfish remain crayfish.
You said crawfish to crayfish. Is that a change?
Crawfish,
What's the difference?
crayfish,
Do you call them?
crawdads.
Is it crawdads or crawfish?
Sure.
Variation within the kind.
Depends where you're at.
Okay. Anyway,
it surprised the world because they expected, you know, a change like this to occur like over a long period of time.
Exactly.
And it happened quickly. Almost immediately, they say here, it appeared almost immediately, not over several generations. So having it occur is not a big deal. Now, it is kind of a unique one in that, you know, its genetics were a little bit different because it ended up with an extra copy in there.
Yeah.
And so they're actually a little bit bigger, but it's no new information. It's just a copy of the same old information that was there.
It's really a good example of amazing variation within God's.
so if Georgia was here,
I'm surprised
let me ask Georgia.
All over these things. Like, let's go eat these things.
I was going to ask Georgia a
They
question.
eat escargot, right, in France. So that's snails. So they should be all over this.
So she would say it's just genetic variability within
Within the kind.
Within the crayfish, within the kind.
Yeah.
And actually, God created some of those types of organisms to be able to reproduce sexually and asexually.
Right.
So that's all that is.
Yeah.
Hey, somebody said here they're watching from their couch. I'm glad they're not driving while they're watching. So somebody from Australia, how about that?
I've had a couple
And
comments about people using
they
our
said it's
PBS.
crawfish in Louisiana.
Crawfish.
Crawfish.
Not crayfish.
Crawfish.
What about
Crawfish. Crayfish in Australia and crawdads according to Bodie.
well,
Okay,
yeah.
right. Let's get on with this next article. Neanderthal. Remember Neanderthal man? You know, when they first talked about Neanderthal man years ago, the evolutionists made them look like some brutish,
Yes.
half ape, half human, and, you know, was sort of some, like, you know, much more closely related to apes and were not human.
Right.
They've changed their views of Neanderthal.
You know, they really
Oh, yeah.
have. The first one that they ever really found and discovered and studied was on a farm from a famous Christian hymn writer, Joachim Neander.
Yeah.
And that's where the name
in
Neanderthal
the Neander
comes from.
Valley,
It's named
wasn't
after
it in the
famous
Neander Valley in Germany?
It is. That's where the valley was actually on his farm there.
Sure.
And so that's where that came from.
But since that time, they found Neanderthal skeletons with musical instruments. So they made flutes.
They had clothing.
They had clothing.
Makeup.
They buried their
And
dead.
makeup.
Yep.
Buried their dead. Had makeup.
Yep.
Jewelry.
Jewelry as well.
And they even found they can even
Lot
do
of spear
they
points
can
and
do
things.
paintings in caves better than I can do.
That's not a high
'Cause
standard.
all I
Well,
can-
that's not a high standard here.
I realize I can only do stick figures.
Yeah.
But what's this latest article here,
Well, yeah,
buddy?
this one here, okay, they find that this fallow deer, which a fallow deer is more of like a modern type of deer, but they're claiming that it was 120,000 years ago that it had been stabbed from the back side with a wooden point. And so what they were saying is they're making a giant interpretation here that Neanderthals had to sneak up to him. See, they have to tell the story.
Sure.
Sneak up behind him really good, and they stab him with it. You know, as soon as I saw that, I'm like, okay, there are interpretations in here because, I mean, even in the secular world, by their own story, they have spear points and stuff, you
Sure.
know, going back allegedly 500,000 years ago.
Well, they weren't there, so they're making their best guess.
That's right.
Based
So
on
they're
their
making
worldview.
some stories on this.
Right.
Now, there's other ways that people have hunted deer. You know, they'll set up spears and they'll drive them and things like that.
And they were saying it
So
showed
there's some
cooperative hunting.
interpretation
They're
in there,
working
yeah.
together. They're stalking their prey, so it shows intelligence. So
Yeah,
that may all
yeah.
be true.
This is the exact quote from the article. Such a confrontational way of hunting required careful planning, concealment, close cooperation between individual hunters. In other words, intelligence. And increasingly, even evolutionists are saying that Neanderthal was intelligent. And now they, in museums, well, if they've changed their displays, like a lot of them don't even change their displays, but a lot of the modern pictures of Neanderthal, they make them look much more human, don't they?
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Right. So this whole story is because a deer was stabbed by a chunk of wood.
Yeah.
Really, we need to,
yeah.
just a big picture. We need to understand.
That's true. It's a whole big article.
Yeah.
Well, and
Now,
one
see,
of, go ahead.
Neanderthals, from big picture, they are a group of people who came from the Tower of Babel, spreading to different parts of the world. It's interesting if you look up the range for where we find Neanderthal fossils, and you know, essentially where they were living and where they died, in particular, it actually matches up very well with the Celts, an ancient people group that came out of Gomer, one of Noah's grandsons.
I'm going to ask you a question. Brian, I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
Do you think we could grow a Neanderthal brain in a Petri dish?
Oh,
we
what?
could
Now,
not. Georgia, maybe.
Our
Neanderoids or something?
studio audience is looking at me and saying, what are you talking about? I think we should try to grow a Neanderthal brain, don't you? Now, the reason I say that is because of the next article. The next article, mini Neanderthal brains are growing in Petri dishes. So now we got scientists.
So is it Neanderthal or Neanderthal? I've heard.
Well, actually,
Crossfish,
you know what?
crayfish.
These days, the spelling shouldn't have a H in it, and it shouldn't even have a H in it either. that depends on your country. But
By the way, someone just asked if the new research on the Neanderthals have changed people's views or evolutionists' views on Lucy's toes.
oh well, there's an article about that
Familiar
too.
with it, yeah,
but
yeah.
we'll do that in
we'll
one of
do
the
that here.
next Answers News programs. So make sure you watch. By the way, I wonder if the cat's watching. There's
wonder
there's
if the
one of our
cat's watching.
supporters in Florida. They have a cat. Whenever Answers News is on, it gets in front of it. If I'm speaking, it watches. If I'm not speaking, it goes to sleep. So I'm just wondering what it's doing today.
Yeah, I'm seeing some people
so-
from all over the world.
Hey, a real quick apologetic point too before we leave that article. If you look at the skeletons we find of human fossils, Neanderthals included, it's around a few thousand, right? Now, if humans have been around for 100, 300,000 years like the secularists suggest, there should be billions, maybe even trillions of human fossils all around the world.
And we don't
We find
them.
a few thousand.
Yeah.
Consistent within the biblical worldview is a huge problem for the
And
evolutionary
that makes sense, in light of Babel and
Yep.
the time frame with that. Dr. Marvin Lubenow wrote an incredible book, and we've mentioned this on the program before. It's called Bones of Contention. This is a revised and updated version, but there's a whole section in here on Neanderthals as well as some more records.
Hey, Bodie, in regard to the deer being hunted with a wooden stick or spear, somebody says, because I know that you hunt deer and kill God's creatures, so it says in here, don't you have to do that today with hunting?
Now, usually people use guns. Sometimes they use arrows, carbide tips, things like that. But they're not really using wooden arrows.
So what's this article here about mini Neanderthal brains? They're not really growing brains.
Yeah, they're growing tissue in particular. That's essentially what's happening. They're doing it in Petri dishes. They're getting a hold of some of the Neanderthal DNA, and they're essentially inserting it and growing it, and they're fiddling with it in certain different ways. And so they're growing some of that tissue. To me, that's really weird.
They call them mini brains. But the reason they're trying to do this, and they're not mini brains, I mean, they don't have a vascular system or anything like that. The whole motivation behind this, just think, they're probably spending thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands of dollars, maybe a lot more than that, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, doing all this research to try to grow mini Neanderthal brains because they believe that Neanderthals are closely related to apes more so than humans.
Right. They try to put them somewhere.
It's all because of evolution. In other words, all this research is done because of evolution, which is a whole waste of time. Because Neanderthals were totally human.
That's right, and they're trying to figure out, according to the article, direct quote, they're trying to figure out the findings may reveal why Neanderthals died out and Homo sapiens went on to conquer much of the planet. So that's what they're trying to figure out. Why did Neanderthals go extinct and Homo sapiens over 100,000 years or so take over the planet? But here's the deal. They're doing all this research, spending all this money to try to figure out how something that never happened occurred.
Yeah.
That's a big problem.
And they are wasting so much. They could be trying to cure cancer, but...
Do you realize billions of dollars has been spent on something that never happened to try to figure out how it never occurred?
So it's a good example of how evolutionary thinking hurts good science.
We have evidence of Neanderthals and modern humans interbreeding.
Interbreeding.
They even point that out in the article, So it's not like they necessarily went extinct. They're still part of the human population even today. All the features of a Neanderthal are within the human population today. People might think, well, what about the ridge brow stuff? I've seen people with a ridge brow make Neanderthals look jealous. I mean, they...
You know what, Bodie? If you could almost look like a Neanderthal.
I could.
So, anyway.
And by the way, if you read the article, there are tons of words like, it's hard to say, we speculate, this may have happened this way, it's far from...
You know what they're
calling?
A lot
of maybe possible words, not hard science.
Do you know what they're calling these little Neanderthal brains? Neanderoids.
You made that up.
No, it's in there. Neanderoids, right there.
So if you do something stupid, I could call you Neanderoid man or something.
Right.
Okay, all right, let's get on with this next article. The next article, they're now starting, the big talk in recent times has been about the millennials and how different the millennials are, how secularized they are. Only 18% of them go to church. How do we reach the millennials? Now they're talking about Generation Z. How do we reach Generation Z? For Australians, it's Generation Z. Z for Australians.
And just so you know what people group that is, essentially, if you want to call it a people group, they're the kids who are born essentially at the end of the 90s, kind of the mid-90s, up to, say, the mid-2000s. So they're actually the true millennials, really.
And basically 13, 18 years old, teenagers.
Something like that nowadays.
Are Generation Z. And Generation Z, in fact, George Barnard did research on Generation Z recently, and here's one of the things he said about them. Teens 13 to 18 years old are twice as likely to say they're atheist. Much more secularized. By the way, what happens, and this article actually talks about this, and it's dealing with Generation Z, and we have here a pastor, and the author of this article spoke with Pastor James Emery White about his new book, Meet Generation Z, and asked him a number of questions about Generation Z. One of the interesting things he says in here is exactly what I say. I have a brand new book here called Gospel Reset. It's about how do you reach the culture today with the gospel, and what I'm saying is Our generations in the past, the older generations, are much more like Acts 2 in the Bible, like the Jews. They, by and large, believed in one God, and when you said, "You sinner," they understood that. But increasingly, our younger generations are like the Greeks in Acts 17, and we have to understand they don't have the foundation to understand the gospel.
They don't know who God is. They don't know what sin is.
And they've been taught against the Bible.
They're in the need of a Savior. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's pointed out here in the article. And one of the things we need to remember is the gospel's always the same. Yep. Going all the way back to what I call Generation Zero, that first generation that Peter and Paul and these guys had to go out and preach to. Now, they went to two different audiences. One went to the Jews, one went to the Greeks, but they're both Generation Zero because they were right there. So the gospel's still the same. Now, the way to reach them is different. And that's what Peter and Paul had to do. They had to reach them in different ways. Hey, one of the things that they said about this Generation Z is they're highly technological. I mean, they've grown up with this technology that many of us are not accustomed to. They've almost always had iPods or iPhones or connection to the internet and things like that. I mean, why not use that type of technology to preach the gospel?
To reach them. But here's the thing, to connect with our previous article, a lot of churches think, just have a lot of music and that'll get them in. I found, it doesn't matter whether it's Generation Z, the Millennials, they all want answers and want you to show them that you can really trust the Bible and answers to what they're being taught, and they want to know what life is all about. And when you believe Genesis and you've got that apologetics emphasis, we can go out there and reach those people and help them understand.
I think a powerful quote from the article, it says this. First, talking about the Generation Z, they have a strong desire to make a difference with their lives. They are attracted to what will enable them to make that difference. A faith that is privately engaging but socially irrelevant will not attract them. In other words, a faith that is good for your private world but does not affect the world around you, does not connect to concrete things, is not interesting. They love to see a faith that connects to the real, tangible world, makes it alive and powerful. You do that by standing on God's word.
And we've got to remember something. They've also been taught that if you speak against homosexual behavior or gay marriage, then you're unloving and you're unkind and so on.
Right.
We've got to explain.
They've been indoctrinated.
We've got to help them understand. If you have the foundation of God's word, you have a particular worldview. If the foundation of man determines truth, you've got a whole different worldview. They don't understand their worldview they've been taught comes from the foundation that man determines truth. That's right. And we have to really get them to understand there's a whole different foundation.
Absolutely.
Right. They've been taught sexual immorality from a very young age, as sad as that is to say, but that's the mentality, that's the worldview by which they have. That's called sexual humanism. That's a religion.
Sure.
Now, what's interesting is you go back to Generation Zero, when Paul went to the Greeks, I mean, he had to deal with a lot of people who were involved in sexual immorality. And a lot of people had to come out of that. So, I mean, there's a lot of similarities when you go back and compare the New Testament to what we're involved in.
Well, when I was speaking at the University of Central Oklahoma earlier this year and had the LGBT movement in the auditorium, and one of the questions I was asked concerning the issue of gay marriage and same-sex relations, one of the things I explained to them, look, because I start from the Bible and believe the book of Genesis, and God created man, male and female, and he created marriage when he created the man from dust and the woman from his side. There was the first marriage. So I believe marriage is a man and a woman because I start with that foundation. But if you don't start with the Bible, if you believe in evolution, you believe it's fact, you believe everything happened by natural processes, you're going to have a different worldview. So therefore, the argument's not about gay marriage or same-sex relations. The argument really is down why do you have the foundation you have for your worldview and why do I have mine? And I'm telling you the Bible is the right starting point. If you say, well, the Bible's not true, then I say, why is it not true? That's so right. I can answer those questions to help point them to the fact it is true, it is God's word.
And help them understand everyone's got a foundational worldview. A lot of times they recognize that and where that battle's really taking place. And recognizing that for so many recent generations, they don't have a biblical worldview, even if they grew up in the church. I taught Bible history in the public schools for 13 years, and year after year, I just watched my kids know less and less about the Bible as they entered my class progressively, and it's just gotten worse since then. So recognizing where they're at, starting from the beginning, giving them a foundation, we can go from there.
Hey, by the way, good news, the cat is watching, and it's on vacation in Missouri.
Are you sure that's good news?
MS. Is MS Missouri? Yeah.
Mississippi.
Oh, Mississippi. What's Missouri then? Oh, M.O.
M.O.
I'm an Australian. How do I know those things?
You get
So anyone here from Mississippi today in the studio? Oh, we have some people from Mississippi. Yeah, there's a cat in Mississippi watching Answers News right now. Okay, so this next one here, we're going to go, well, actually, this one. Iowa court blocks 72-hour waiting period for abortion. In Iowa, there was actually legislation to make women wait 72 hours before having an abortion so that they could just think it through and make sure they're making the right decision. Of course, who launched a lawsuit against the state because of that? Planned Parenthood. And because Planned Parenthood don't want even one child to possibly survive being murdered in their mother's womb. They want as many as possible to be murdered in their mother's womb, because at fertilization you're 100% human, 100% made in the image of God. And Planned Parenthood and the American Civil Liberties Union are the ones that launched the lawsuit and actually got the court there to rule in their favor so that there's not that 72-hour waiting period.
Yeah, so basically, you know, if you have a right to something, they're saying that you should be able to have it immediately. It makes you wonder, are they going to launch a lawsuit, you know, there in Iowa, because Iowa has a waiting period before you can actually buy a gun. So, you know, you'd think if they're going to be consistent, they need to get rid of that waiting period as well. Yeah, I'm curious the way that the mind works. Sometimes people are more than happy.
It's so inconsistent. And, you know, this whole abortion issue, it is a shocking holocaust. 55 to 60 million children have been murdered in their mother's wombs in America since Roe versus Wade. 3,000 a day. And you know what? I'm not going to get into immigration issues and so on, but you know the thing that really irks me is you're watching the news and these people are talking about children at the border and so on. Are the same people talking about what about the 3,000 children every day who are being murdered in their mother's wombs in America? Are they worried about them?
Their mothers,
The hypocrisy is incredible.
Well, in the Bible, so clear, it's life from the beginning. But even within the secular worldview, even most secular scientists recognize that the science is clear. They're human from the beginning. And then if not, the best they can say is we're not sure. So then if you're not sure, don't murder. If it's a human, don't murder it, but still see it taking place.
Hey, you know what surprises me? You know, when someone dies and their heart stops, that's when they say, well, they're not alive anymore, and they call the time of death. Now, why is it then that when a baby's heart is beating, they don't use that as a sign that they're actually alive?
Yeah, again, hypocrisy.
It's hypocrisy. It's a double standard.
Consistently inconsistent.
Hey, how about we do this one, and we'll go over time just a little bit, but I think it would be good to do this one. Philippine president blames stupid God for Adam and Eve's original sin. Let me play the video to show what he actually said.
Si Eve, ginising si Adam, siguro katatapos lang, kumain ka rin. So kinain ni Adam. Then malice was born. Who is this stupid God? Stupid. You created something perfect, and then you think of an event that would tempt and destroy the quality of your work. How can you rationalize a God?
Can you imagine standing before God one day and say, I led a nation and I told everyone you were stupid, and then use expletives to talk about God? You know, a couple of things real quickly. One is, apparently, there's other articles saying that he had, as a child, I guess, an interaction with a priest, and there was some abuse there. Right. And I think what he's really doing is he's angry at God. One of the things I've noticed, that there are many secularists, many atheists in America, that when you talk to them, you find out many of them were brought up in the church, and something happened in their life, death or suffering or something, or someone they know had abuse or whatever it is, and I think that they're really angry at God. But think about this. Here is a fallible human who's appraising an infinite God and telling God, you know, you had no right to do this. Right. How dare he do that? What does he think? He's God?
Right.
He's. Oh, by the way,
you know what? The same thing can
do you know what our
our
sin nature from Genesis? You'll become like God. He's acting as his own God.
Right, and he's trying to judge God. By what standard? He's trying to do it by his own fallible human standard. But the same thing can be said of this president. You know, why would the president of the Philippines sit in an office of purity and let it succumb to such evil? He's in the exact same situation. You
And
know,
by
if
the
you
way,
let's say
he
use that
said
type
out
of
loud
argument.
what many people believe in their heart as non-believers. And unbelief sin is what's represented there. Basically that he's showing in the pride of our hearts, in our sinful state, if we're not saved, we raise ourselves above God. My way is better than yours. I trust myself over your word. That's the essence of sin.
Yeah.
Of pride, of raising oneself over what God says clearly in his word. So
Right.
what he says represents the thinking of many who have given over to sin. And what they need is to be saved through the gospel of Jesus Christ. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, we've
Well,
come
we're
to a close here. By the way, you want me to? Let me tell you something that I think is miraculous. Your wife has been in here the whole time, and she didn't walk out.
She didn't walk out?
And your 2 children, yeah, they're in here too.
I had some bad
And
jokes I thought about saying, but she tempered me down a little bit.
And so for those in the studio audience, we're going to go out in the lobby and we'll have a meet and greet for 20 minutes or so if you'd like to come and say hi to the rest of you. We'll see you on Thursday at 2 o'clock.
I'll be back then.
God bless you guys.
Okay.
See you guys.